Yes. And yeah, good evening for the audience from Indonesia, but unfortunately, they are not here yet. Today is our fourth week on lecture series short movie production. And now we are going to discuss how to make a storyboard as an important part of the short movies production with our guest lecturer today, Shanti Zschocke. It is a very pleasure for us to have you as a speaker today, Shanti, and thank you so much. And first of all, may I briefly introduce you to the audience? I have like this, yes. So, Shanti Zschocke is a Boston-based animator and illustrator specializing in digital media and stop motion animation. So she graduated with departmental honors from Massachusetts College of Art and Design in 2019, and now works as a motion designer for Richard Lewis Media Group. This is a media company providing large-scale interactive and immersive experience for prominent museums across the US. And outside of her work in motion and film, she is an active member of the Greater Boston art community, having provided extensive branding work and social media content for nonprofit creative events. For example, GP Movie Night, Berklee College of Music, Colleges of the Fenway Multicultural Arts. So here you can see some movies made by Shanti. And as always, at the beginning of the class, we will watch together movies made by the speaker. And before later hear their presentation and have a discussion on that. So I will stream the movies from Shanti. For this class, we have two movies. The first one is Wayang Pong, and then the second one is Prodding Out of the Step. So I will stream from here, or I just send the link for all of you. Is it better for me stream from here, Mbak Yanti? Yeah, thank you. So,
Oh, I think the playback is a little bit jumpy. Maybe it's better to watch through a link.
yes, okay, I think so.
Sorry about that.
Okay, I will send it via chat, right? Wait.
We watch first film first, right? The Wayang Pong first. Yeah, the first link.
I will send to link. And it's better too because sometimes my internet connection isn't stable.
Of course, so we will watch both. Okay.
This one, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Please,
okay.
and I think we will back on 10 minutes. 10 minutes or 7 minutes.
Yeah, the first one is like 3 minutes something, right? And the second one like 5 minutes something. Yeah. Okay. So in 10 minutes.
All right. Yeah.
Yes. Halo Mbak Yanti.
Ya, saya sudah sih.
Halo. I just finished. It's really.
We will until everyone is done. So you watch the second one, Baida, because you haven't seen it, right?
Yeah, and I think it's really touched my heart because it's the music, it's like non-stop music, and then the full of symbol, and then wow, it's really. You have to say a word, Shanti, after this about this, two movies, I think. Yeah.
The soundtrack, the musician that I worked with was incredible. He did, I didn't even have to review it. First draft, it was perfect.
Yeah.
You can tell later about that, because I think the students are very interested in knowing, the background and everything about how you did that and how you prepared and so.
Sure. I think everyone is finished right now, Mbak Yanti.
Okay, everyone? Can you ask everyone if they're finished?
Hello, are you here already? Hello.
Very good.
Yeah.
So you all watch already, both? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Shanti, you can give or say something about these movies before you start your presentation, because it will be very good for us to know also the background and everything about these movies. Please.
Of course. So thank you so much for introducing me and introducing my work. Hi everyone, my name is Shanti. Thank you so much for having me, and also thank you for your patience with me to speak in English today. I know that is not everyone's mother tongue, so I really appreciate your patience. Those films, both of those films I made during my time at university. Wayang Pong was my junior year final film, which the time frame was about 6 months for that one, a little bit under that. And then the second film was my senior thesis film, so I spent a whole year working on that. And both of them were sort of my introduction to storyboarding and my introduction to sort of the techniques that work for me and don't. And I learned a lot of things. Working on Wayang Pong was a rushed storyboard experience, and I tried to use those experiences in the next film. But just a brief synopsis about what they were about. Wayang Pong, I animated it in stop motion, so that everything that you saw was done purely in paper cut, in real time, and the animation process was pretty extensive for that one in comparison to the other one. It was about 12 hours a day for those 5 months straight. And the story for that one was inspired by my childhood having a Western upbringing, and how that conflicts in a lot of ways with having a Muslim Asian upbringing, and how those two sides of myself tended to be in a lot of conflict. So I wanted to use that film to sort of explore some memories that I had from my childhood, imagery of prayer with my mother, and being interested in things that are traditionally taboo, such as tattoos. And in a lot of ways, I wanted it to be open-ended so that people who have experiences growing up in a culture that is maybe different from their parents, or, having been growing up in third culture, I feel a lot of people can relate to that experience. And the second film was also related to experience that I had growing up in a different culture. That one was more related to the experience of going to school in Germany, but having a lot of language and cultural barriers, and that being sort of something that felt like it was stifling from being able to learn. So that's sort of what that story is about. Both of them, actually, like pretty much all of my work kind of explores ideas of my childhood, closing the door on a lot of things, and hopefully being able to resonate with people, because the goal of mine is to keep it open-ended enough that hopefully people can draw their own experiences from similar things. So I can get into the presentation now. Let me share my screen. Oops. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's big now.
So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about storyboarding. And like I said before, I've had a pretty extensive, sometimes messy relationship with this topic. In a lot of ways, I still think that I'm really learning a lot about this topic. And there's a lot of things I had to learn the hard way. So I hope that I can make all of this simpler for you based on my experiences. So this is just a brief overview of me. Any questions that maybe we can't talk about today, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'd love to help out. So one thing that I will get into in my presentation, I will sort of compare the two films that I worked on and what worked storyboarding wise in one, and what didn't work in the other. The main difference was that I spent 1 week storyboarding for Wayangpong, and then I spent about 6 months storyboarding for the second film, because I really wanted to get the story right. Storyboarding doesn't need to be that extensive of a process, but it can really help because it is the problem solving stage. I want to stress that storyboarding is not about how amazing of a visual artist you are or how well you draw or any of that. I think it's much more about understanding what cinematic language you can use as a tool to express your ideas and apply it so that, you know, the tone and the pace and overall main idea comes through even with a simple set of shapes, arrows, and stick figures. So just out of curiosity, is this the first time working in film for all of you, or do you guys have any experience? I see one head shake. That's okay. I was in the same boat very recently, and I'm here to help. So just brief idea, what is a storyboard? I see it as a visual linear representation of how a film or video will play out. And it breaks down all the different actions into individual panels, illustrating the progression of the plot shot by shot. So it's basically just a sequential set of drawings that is the blueprint or the guide or the means of communication with the future you. It's really important to keep in mind that you'll be speaking with maybe someone you'll be working with in the future. Just keep thinking ahead, even working with yourself in the future, putting concrete visuals to concepts that don't have a form yet, just so that you don't get overwhelmed or confused in the process. And before I get into breaking down some of the differences in my films, I just want to give a brief overview of some basic terminology and some basic structure that a lot of storyboarding falls into. The image that you see at the top is typically how storyboards are arranged, although you can adjust it according to what you think you need to communicate your ideas best. So a couple terms that are important. A scene is a sequence of panels, and within those panels, those are key moments or major actions within those shots. And a shot is one camera take or a single setup. And then you have those images at the top, and then at the bottom, you want to be able to have some writing to accompany your visual notes just for clarity's sake. And everyone does this differently. But traditionally, there are three main things you want to make sure to keep in mind. You want to make sure that you're pulling from the script so you know who's saying what, if there is any dialogue. You want to describe the actions that are happening that are screen specific. So that means acting, timing, composition, things that you'll be considering during the actual filming, or if you're animating process. And then finally notes, which goes for other things, typically production related or post-production, maybe things you want your editor to be working on, or lighting in the scene. So that's pretty much the basics of it. That's a bit about the skeleton, but I want to go into what a camera shot is, just because I think these are often confused with panels or scenes, and I think the difference is pretty significant and pretty important and can affect the timing and the pace of your film. So on the side of the screen, it's a snippet of some freelance work that I did for a client to introduce the idea of camera shots. Shots are not the same as panels. You need panels to represent a shot. One shot is one camera cut. And as you see here in this image, I have one camera shot at the top and then another one at the bottom. You can have multiple actions and camera moves within a single cut. But yeah, overall here, so quickly to describe also what I mean by action. In the first two images, I was told to have an interviewer interviewing a man on a bed, and to have a subtle camera move from one side to the next. So that is the action. It's the camera move. It's the little smoke coming out of his cigarette. And in the second one, the action is the hands moving away from the player. And so, yeah, camera shots, panels, and action, all different things. So what makes a good storyboard? This is my opinion, but I usually find that these guidelines help me a lot. The first and most important point, in my opinion, is that it is clear. You really want to think about legibility. You want to think about your future self, potential people you might work with. You're making much more than visual decisions. You want to think about timing, how long you're spending on a shot, how do we transition smoothly and with what nature. You want to think about the pacing and tempo, movement as well, camera movement. The second important thing is that everything needs to be intentional. Everything needs to have a defined reasoning. This is the stage for big statement choices. So really consider, why do we need this information represented? What is priority and what's secondary? And what are we trying to communicate, on, like, even including like on an emotional level or an atmospheric level. You want to really think about if this is the most effective way to depict something, if you're doing this for a reason, or if you're just doing it for, you know, pizzazz. Maybe that's something that doesn't need to happen in the storyboarding process. And the very last and also very important point is keeping it loose. Like I said before, this is a problem-solving stage. So you really want to take time for exploration. You want to take it too far and then scale it down. You want to do something crazy and then, you know, take it down rather than avoiding it altogether. You never know what you might find. And if there's a time to make a mistake, it's in the storyboarding process. There tends to be a bit of a ripple effect with problems that you don't resolve in the storyboarding process, or at least that's been my experience. So if you're communicating clearly, but also leaving room for development, so that maybe you can even return to it when you're already producing your film or even in post-production. And you don't just want to merely represent a sequence of events. Try and get the essence as close as you can to the final product. Represent some level of emotional quality. The way I see it, if the emotions are coming through in the storyboard, they will definitely come through in the film, but if they don't, you don't know how they'll feel in time. So it's always really good to think about. So staging is a really important word that I'm going to be using as well, especially if you're working with characters, but also I think that when you're working with film, you can think about your film in terms of conflict and resolution, and you can think of abstract ideas as characters. But staging is the key to clarity. When you're creating a composition, you want to start from major forms and then divide those into subforms and then fill in the details. And that way you're not overwhelming the thumbnail with too much information. But to a degree, you also want to illustrate your characters or actors facing the camera or facing, they're facing away, to push that a little bit more so that you can get a really good range of their body language and emotion. This will carry your dialogue, it will carry your plot, it will help your viewers better understand how to connect with those characters. So there's a little example that I have on the side. A common problem I fell into with Wayang Pong, which I'll go into more detail about, was that I had people standing straight from the side and never put them at an angle, and it's really easy for compositions to fall flat that way. So really give yourself room in the storyboarding process to explore that as well. And so last terminology slide, I promise, but I think these are all really important too. Silhouette, I think everyone's probably familiar with that. But I think that if you can capture the essence of a character with a silhouette before worrying about the details, and be really intentional about when you add detail, I think the character will stand out more, and that can be, good or bad depending on your motivations in the story. With space, you don't want to overwhelm. You want to be strategic about negative and positive space. Communicating everything is important, but leave out all the touch-ups and details. Thumbnails are small and you have a lot of them, so use it to your advantage, save time, keep it legible, and it forces you to consider the big idea. Line of action, it's kind of similar to staging in that you want your poses to be dynamic. You don't want to be able to draw a straight line through the character. You want to be able to draw some sort of curve or S shape, just for it to be a little bit more expressive. I think this is something that applies a little bit more to animation than it does live action, but I think when mapping out your scenes, it's always good to consider how you might want your actors to behave. And everything I'm talking about is coming from an animator's perspective, but I think it can all be applied to live action just as well. And then twinning and parallels is just a little bit more about posing, just keeping it dynamic, keeping it a little bit asymmetrical. It's all about reading body language that's clear, believable, exaggerated as far as it makes sense. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience with some of these concepts in the films that we saw. Thank you again for all taking the time to watch it. One of the main things that I dealt with in Wayang Pong that I think had the audience walking away with a number of questions is that I had these two characters that were suggested to be the same person, but also not. And I think that was due to the fact that they were always mirroring each other, or that their positioning in themselves was always mirrored and flat. That was intended to be a creative choice, but I think that if you're making the choice to break a rule, like breaking the rule of, not working in the rule of thirds, but instead working in the center, you really, really want to push that. And otherwise, you're just going to fall flat. And so, I learned my lesson from that. And when I was working on Sprouting Out of Step, I have little lines here to kind of show you the way that I approach posing in my newer piece, kind of understanding that, people aren't always stiff. People should be moving dynamically, and those body language cues are going to tell my audience what to feel about my characters. And I wanted my audience to feel very differently about my characters. I didn't want my audience to like the teacher, and I wanted my audience to like the protagonist. So these are things that you have to really consider. So how to think about clarity. You want to think about it in terms of shapes and space. You want to start big in general. You want to play with creative framing. You want to, research some design principles that maybe other films that you've watched have really stood out to you. You want to balance positive and negative space. You're working on a small canvas. You want to push poses to the extreme, and you really want to ask yourself questions after you sketch these things out, because often I feel like you'll get the best results reviewing your work time and time again. There's like a couple of things I usually ask myself, whether or not the character is readable as I want them to be positioned. Is there enough negative space, not only for the pose to be readable, but also for the composition to look good? And if there is open space, is that intentional? I pretty much did the opposite here. I was very busy in Wayangpong, and I didn't want any negative space. I wanted everything to be filled. And then in Wayangpong, I really wanted to focus on the characters and their emotions in the scene. So those are sort of conscious choices. You also just want to consider if the poses of your character, they match the nature and personality of the character. You can have certain types of body language assigned to one character, and it'll really communicate not only things about that character, but their relationship with others and their relationship with the world.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
One, you use a negative and positive space. I don't understand them. I'm sorry.
No worries. I'll bring it back up here. So negative space is the empty space around a form, and positive space is that space within that's sort of filled. So as an example, in one of my shots here, all that in sprouting out of step, all that pink background space where there's nothing going on, that's the negative space. Okay. And it can make a scene much more breathable, much more airy. It can even create like a feeling of isolation or openness. And then having those characters contrast that, those are the negative space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the positive is being filled, like in the second, the below. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, and if there's any terminology you guys are wondering about, I can elaborate a little more.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea if you just have a question like Pak Ian, you just ask that. Yeah, Shanti, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So maintaining continuity and staying intentional. This is really important if you have a story that is coming from different angles with different characters, if you want to have movement, but you don't want to confuse your viewer. So to summarize these ideas really briefly, if you can, you want to dedicate a side of the screen to certain characters or elements to allow your viewers to follow more easily. It also gives you more room to explore more complex compositions or more dynamic movement. And you don't need to marry a character to like the right side of the screen for the whole film. It's usually scene by scene or shot by shot just for legibility reasons. This is especially important if you're working with action or like fight scenes. So you want to ask yourself questions if your scene has more than one character. You want to see if the scene needs opposing poses. Do all these characters need to be in the scene at this time? And are they making the same poses? They really shouldn't be unless, it adds to the story. And so I will share a little example of how I use this in Wayangpong. So because my characters were very similar in design, and they were meant to mirror each other in a lot of ways, and they were standing on opposite sides of the screen, I really wanted to emphasize that and push that so that people don't get disoriented. So I married the girl with hijab to the, I'm trying to flip myself, to the left side of the screen, and the other girl to the right side of the screen. And the reason I found that really important too is because there is one scene where the girl on the right side is having a flashback to a memory where she was wearing a hijab. So her character design was actually very similar to the other character. And the only way that I could really signify that these are two different characters is by having the audience associate each of them with one side of the screen. So she was always on the right, she would be facing the left, and that's how I oriented everyone. And I brought that a little bit further in sprouting out of step, but maybe in a less obvious way. But when it comes to a scene where people are moving around, you can use your characters as anchors for that space. And so I use these two characters in the first scene as the anchors for that space. And almost every occasion I had, with the exception of maybe one or two, I had the camera pointed at them from like a slightly off-center front view of the desk. I always had their seating arrangement be the same, and that sort of allowed me to move the teacher around wherever I wanted, because the audience would know where he was standing in relation to the students sitting at this desk. I also chose to bring the black-haired girl closer so that I could emphasize her height more, and so that I could make the girl on the other side feel a little bit less pronounced, smaller, more timid. And these are sort of decisions that you can make where, yes, you're trying to orient the viewer, but you can also say something about the characters while you're doing it. And so this kind of leads me to my next point, which is spatial awareness within a shot. That is something that I think a lot of my audience got confused with in the first film. And I think it's because I decided to push that idea of a really busy space and wasn't thinking about negative and positive space as much as I was in the second film. So on the left here, I have some examples of 2 shots that people came to me with a lot of questions about. With the first shot, it's supposed to be a girl looking into a tattoo parlor, getting a tattoo, but for a mixture of reasons, timing, space, arrangement related, people were a little bit lost at the scene and didn't really know how to interpret that. So I think that was something that could have been solved in the storyboarding process. And with the image on the right, something that I tried to think about kind of what I've learned from this project and apply that. So the way I dealt with spatial awareness, I think more successfully in this storyboard, the task that I got from the client is that he wanted to start with a character playing the instrument, and then he wanted to move out and pan out to reveal that that man was playing in the city of Paris. And the way I chose to do that was to use a slow pan out into the sky and then use the birds coming into the screen as a sort of anchor for the camera move. And that way the audience would have a relatively good sense of where they were in space, despite the fact that they're traveling across like basically a blank sky and going from like a close-up of one person to like a cityscape far away view of the city. So, you know, storyboards are like a great place to plan out decisions like this. And if they make sense to you in storyboard format, then they're going to make sense to you in the format of a film. So these are just a couple questions that are good to ask when working on this sort of thing. Again, I think this is one of those things, it is really easy to get confused in a film if it's not planned out properly. So think about, you know, timing, when are we going to cut to the next shot? And if there's a reasoning behind that tempo, the tempo can communicate some level of emotion, so you do want to consider that. Think about the camera cut, moving it using visual cues. So that, for example, is what I did with the birds in that storyboard prior. There's other things you could do, like you could have, you know, a house with a chimney and the smoke coming out of that, and that smoke leads you to another spot in the film. It's not necessary, but especially if you want to have a dramatic transition from one environment to the next, this can be really helpful. And it can also help smoothen cuts, which is the next sort of question you want to ask yourself. You want to use your elements as a tool to inspire the camera moves, if you can. That way everything feels really interconnected. So here's one more example of how I anchored the positioning of my audience in my film. I had this scene which went through a couple storyboarding rounds where I wanted the Venus flytrap to creep up on this little girl, but I really wanted him to like weave through the room. But the first draft of that, where I really had him weaving through chairs and all of that, that was completely not understandable. You were disoriented. So the solution I came to was that I wanted the stem of the Venus flytrap to be anchored at the bottom right side of the screen. So even though it seems like he's coming from all sorts of directions in all of these shots, when it comes down to it, if you follow the stem of the Venus flytrap, it starts at essentially the same place in every shot. And that, again, is just a way to anchor my audience. And so now I want to talk about camera angles. And I think that a lot of times when people hear about camera angles, they don't think of it as part of the storyboarding process for whatever reason. They think of it as sort of a production step. But this is really important because it's going to represent the lens of the viewer. Don't stop putting yourself in the shoes of the viewer when you're designing a storyboard. Whether or not you planned it, every creative decision you make at this point as a director is going to impact the audience's interpretation of what you create. You have the opportunity to establish hierarchies and relationships between characters. So you don't want to rely solely on dialogue and design to make impressions of your characters and feelings. You want some nonverbal communication, and it's a really powerful tool that even we use to communicate in our day-to-day life to interpret our surroundings, to determine whether or not we feel safe or comfortable somewhere. So don't neglect how this can make or break someone's perception of the world that you create. And of course, ask yourself questions. I feel like I say this a lot, but you don't want to step away from the storyboard without really grilling yourself. So I want to introduce you guys briefly to the world of camera angles with some of the most basic ones. You don't need to know all of these, and there's no need to use all of these at all. But I think if I can shed some light on each of these, I can give you guys a little bit better understanding of how these things can really shape people's interpretations of your characters and of your world. Again, this is one of those things I think people instinctively tend to separate this concept from storyboarding, but it's transformative. Like you cannot draw a panel without considering the camera angle. You want to make it concrete, you want to make it intentional, you want to make the connection to your character, you want to make your audience feel something. So I'll go over these briefly. I'll try not to overwhelm, but zoom, I think everyone is very familiar with. It's very standard. It's just you're moving towards or away from a subject and you're really magnifying a focus point. It's a less natural camera move, but it can be used to emphasize something, to really zero in on a focus point. And a pan is when your camera is moving horizontally on a central axis. So it's as if you were standing and you're turning your head. So the direction is constant, but the perspective sort of shifts. This is really dynamic and three-dimensional, and it can be a way to follow character movement, to reveal an environment, to make the audience feel like they're discovering something or looking for something. And then you have tilt, which is sort of the same nature, but it's moving vertically instead. You can establish character hierarchies here, or the idea of like an impending doom coming from a subject, a terrifyingly like tall structure that needs to be climbed from the perspective of a character at the bottom, or maybe a really slow way to reveal that large structure. This is also a more organic three-dimensional move. And then we have dolly, which is similar to zoom. It feels more like, instead of the camera moving, it feels like the world around the subject is moving. If you do it slowly, it can feel very intimate. If you do it really quickly, it can feel like something like shock or like jarring is happening. You have this replicated in like a lot of cartoons when there's like bad news and it zooms in really, really quickly to the character and their background just disappears around them. It's all about what they're feeling in that moment. Again, no rules to what these express. Like, you can use the cinematic language the way that it works best for you. You have truck, which is a track-mounted camera move as well, as is the last one. And track-mounted just means that the camera is mounted onto a structure that can have a very much smoother move instead of handheld. With a truck, you're moving horizontally, and this is another way to maybe follow characters in action. It's very fluid, so it might make you feel a little bit more separate from the character, but maybe that is what you want. And then we have pedestal, which is moving a camera up and down in relation to a subject. Sort of similar essence to any other camera move with that nature. Establishing shots are my favorites. This is a way to build ambiance and context of what's to come. It indicates when and where a scene takes place. I think my favorite, most exciting usage is like in Disney movies, when they introduce these like fantasy worlds at the start of the movie, and you don't know what this world is made up of, and you don't know anything about the story yet, but you understand the essence of it. You know that it's extravagant, it's magical, the experience is really immersive. a lot of movies start with these shots, and I think everyone will probably have one of these at some point. So, those are sort of my favorite to play with. I think that is a really good world building opportunity in your storyboard. Full shot is straightforward, just your subject head to toe. You're focusing on the character's movement rather than the emotional quality typically. And then here are the last ones. Medium shot, close shot, and extreme close shot are all really similar. They all just emphasize really different things. If you have a medium shot, you've got someone knees up. It's usually about the background environment plus their character gestures. You're close enough to capture body language and some level of emotion. With a close shot, the head or face takes up the majority of the frame. This is about emotions and reactions and connecting to the audience. And if you're doing an extreme close-up, that is usually not very commonly used. You're probably making a big statement when you use it. It's dramatic. There's a lot of emphasis. It could be some sort of like plot twist realization. It's really unnaturally close, so should only be used in an extreme case. And then you have an upshot, which is kind of similar to what some of the pans can communicate, in that you have the perception of looking at a character from a low perspective. They can feel powerful and heroic in this way, or they can feel menacing and dangerous. And with a down shot, you've got the opposite. You can make them look vulnerable or powerless or pure and innocent. It scales them against their environment too, so it can de-emphasize them, make them feel less significant. Over the shoulder is common if you have a lot of dialogue in your film. It's as straightforward as it sounds. You're looking over the shoulder of one person to see the reactions of another character. They're pretty much about the interaction, emphasizing one character over the other. But with a two shot, you have two characters in one frame that are sort of balanced, and this is much more about their relationship with one another. It kind of sheds an equal amount of light on both. And then lastly, your point of view shot. This is first person. We're usually putting ourselves in the view of the character here. So, excuse me, this is really about understanding, their state of mind and getting to know them on a personal level. So here are just a couple of examples, and I think this is my favorite lesson that I've learned working with storyboards, is just how much angles can change things up. If you guys remember Wayang Pong, everything was pretty much from a straightforward angle all the time, and they tell you not to do that, but I did it anyway because I thought it was a stylistic choice, but I think there were some opportunities there that could have been pushed a little further. So for example, in the first shot here, I have the teacher pouring over the water over a student's head. I really wanted it to feel like he was very dominant. I wanted it to feel like he was pouring it over the viewer. I wanted the viewer to feel vulnerable in his presence. And similarly, since the Venus flytrap is an extension of his character, I tried to do the same thing with the shot next to that as well. And then sort of like what I mentioned in the beginning, where I like to shoot the protagonist from a top-down angle, because I wanted her to feel timid and she felt powerless throughout the movie, and I wanted the audience to be able to pick up on that from, not just from her design, but from the angles that they see her from. And so, yeah, I did that in the bottom too. And I think those things also help me push the character designs to fit that a little bit more. The character sitting next to her who has a really tall head, I decided to push that because I was always putting her at an angle where, she was being seen from the top down. And I was like, how can I make sure that she comes across as strong despite this sort of angle that kind of minimizes the character? So those are all things that I talked about. And these are the sort of things that your audience won't necessarily pick up, and you don't necessarily want them to pick up on. They're sort of things that you want them to subconsciously use to interpret your world and your characters. And so to wrap it all up, I want to emphasize the importance of keeping things loose. Like I said before, it's the problem-solving stage. You want to allow yourself to return to the board. One of the things that I find really helpful to do when storyboarding is working with note cards, because you can rearrange them as much as you want. And it also teaches you to be strategic about how many panels you choose to draw and how many actions you choose to represent. Because if you represent too many, then you can't really move them around as much as you should be in the stage. I have another little example of that same commission that I worked on, where I had to illustrate a background into this shot, but only enough to give context of the character and what they were doing. So this kid is actually supposed to be in their bedroom in a really cluttered room, but I chose to only show kind of like the record player and the album covers on the floor and like a lamp to express the environment he's in, just enough to communicate that, but not too much where I couldn't play around with it. And these shots they're versatile enough where I was able to move them around with other shots where he was in his room, just because they were vague enough. Vague, but also really clear. And a good way to keep things loose, just on a technical level, if you are choosing to draw, you want to work with line work, light and shadow, and kind of keep it there. Don't jump into color. Don't jump into like designing your character's outfit. Like, don't do any of that. Like, keep it simple. And one thing I do want to add, I don't know if drawing is everyone's thing, but there's a lot of other ways to do a storyboard. If you don't want to draw at all, some people work much better with extensive written descriptions, which I find are easier to rearrange in this process. When I was younger, I used to use like my dolls or The Sims and just like screenshot those and rearrange those into a story. And that was how I blocked out my characters in my world. And I think as long as it works for you and as long as it's clear, it's an effective way to storyboard. So I think it's a very personal process, which I've learned my time working with it. And I'm happy to answer any questions now. Thank you, and good luck with your film. Yeah.
Thank you, Shanti.
Yes, thank you so much. I have quite a few questions, no, a few at least. It was very extremely interesting how these things work. Now I have about your one of my questions is about your last slide, the pre-final slide. These two, no,
sorry.
the one,
Yeah.
yes, this one.
Oh, sorry.
And it's about terminology. Are these what we see? Are these two panels, or and one shot, or two shots, or so? Basically, what could you please repeat what a panel is, and how it differs from a shot?
Yes. So a panel is a drawing. So this is two panels here. A panel is the most straightforward term. It's more technical. And then these two panels exist in one. Hold on. I'm going to pull up this shot again just so that we can see it. Here we go. So they both existed in one shot. And one shot is here. One shot is one camera move. So one camera setup. So if you set up your camera, let's say you set up your camera facing a tree, you are still in that camera shot up until you pick up that camera and move it to a different angle. But there has to be a cut in between that. So if you are moving your camera from that tree all the way to another tree, you're still in the same camera shot because you haven't cut that scene. So a shot is made up of multiple panels. It's made up of multiple drawings. And within each drawing, there is one action. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's confusing. I would get confused about it all the time.
Well, if you look at the action in the two panels in the end, there's the action of the bird, and there's the movement of the person looking, the child looking outside or looking towards the bird, because first he's looking towards the ground, and then you make him look up.
Yeah, exactly. So If it makes more sense, I'll just say, like, you can have multiple actions in one shot. Usually, I think these are one of these words that I've heard people use differently, but I just use action as one change of events happening in that scene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cheers.
So I'm curious, just as a group, were camera angles things that people used to associate with storyboarding before? Because I know that I didn't. Yes, no? Yeah, it's just one of those things where the way you make those decisions, like right now, will have a huge influence on the decisions you make later on. You don't really want to be making too many new decisions once you're really deep in the production process. You want to be able to focus on those embellishments that I know it's really like exciting to get to into the storyboarding process, but you want to like save the good stuff for last.
Santi, I have a question. So,
Yeah.
so our students are the like maybe most of them have the first time making film, short film. So, what is the most important thing they have to do as a beginner, let's say, you know, of making short film? What is the most important things you think based on your experience?
I think something that I've learned is a script is really important, a written script. I'm not someone that thinks with words, so I always jump to the storyboard first. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend when you take your script and you write it out, I think the most important thing is reading it once through for the first time, and taking notes on your instinctual reactions the very first time. So when you're like reading a dialogue, what's the way that you naturally interpret those things in your head? Those are really valuable. The things that you do naturally, the things that you are interested in, like organically, don't deny yourself those things, no matter how simple or irrelevant they might sound. Put those on paper, and I think that later in the process, you'll realize that those actually have a lot more value than you think. Like, really trust your instincts is what I'm saying. But yeah, if you have a script and you're starting with a script, definitely take notes on your primary interpretation of your film. I think when I'm reading a script, sometimes I interpret it with characters and art styles of work that I've seen in the past, but that's good. Like, that's the work that inspires you. That's the work you want to look at. So take notes of those.
For example, if so some student or all the student who are involved in this workshop, if they want to pick a story from a roman, from a novel, you know, like one chapter from a novel, or one scene. So what do they have to pay attention to first, so that it's easier for them to start or to make the film?
So I think that depends on the person. Definitely those mental images that you get the first time. I think that for me, I am a very emotional thinker when it comes to my work. So the first thing that I think about with a prompt like that is my emotional connection to the characters and to the narrator, and building on that. Because I think every decision that you make with a film can be motivated by emotion on some level. So think about what characters you feel like you understand and which ones you don't, and push those. I feel like that is the other most important thing, is if there's something that you notice within a piece or within a story, push that as extreme as you can, essentially.
Thank you. What is easier? Is it making a short film with dialogue or without dialogue? What do you think?
I don't like dialogue, but I know some people do.
Okay.
If they have really unique challenges, I think the challenge with dialogue is that, at least for me, is that you have to spend so much time expressing how those characters want to say things that you can't spend as much time on ambient elements. And for films that don't have a lot of dialogue, in my opinion, there is a lot more room to explore atmospheric elements there's a lot more room, again, for the emotional qualities that I connect with when it comes to characters. I think also it depends on how you want your viewer to interpret your film, because if you have dialogue, you're essentially, in a lot of, not necessarily in all cases, but in many cases, you are kind of telling them exactly what's happening and exactly what characters are feeling and seeing and doing, in a really literal sense. And if you're a really literal person, or if you're dealing maybe, you know, with comedy, I feel like those things, people who are into those things tend to gravitate towards those things. And I think that's great. And if I could do that, I would, but I don't. I've always been a visual thinker. And so for me, I'm much more interested in colors and lighting. I want my characters to have interesting designs. And so it's all about what your skills are, what you're interested in, and what you want to put effort into, because you can put effort into all of those things at the same time. But it's nice to be able to take some things back and exaggerate the one or two ideas that are most important to you. Also, just for context, just in the animation world, animators tend not to do dialogue because it's extra animation work when they're in school. So most films of my peers that I know, or people who work independently, are non-dialogue, just because, again, people are much more visually thinking. And live action, I think you could say the opposite.
Thank you.
Maybe I have a question. Thank you very much for your comprehensive presentation. It was very interesting. Because you are an expert in doing like stories without a text or without any dialogue, I would like to ask, so what has to be considered if like in doing a film without a dialogue? Because I also thought about doing a film without a dialogue, and I saw in both of your films the message is still conveyed, even though there is no dialogue. So I want to ask what has to be considered. Thank
Yeah,
you.
of course. Thank you so much. That's a great question. Well, I I know I say this a lot, but camera angles are everything. Like, they really, really are. On top of that, if you're dealing with characters, body language and posing, like I mentioned before, also contributes to a lot of those things. I think one thing that people assume with film that don't have dialogue is that they don't need a script. But in my opinion, they do. You want to be able to write out everything that everyone is doing. And if it comes across over text, again, it might be a little bit harder, but it's easier to convey that than when you move into film format. I think there's a lot of other things that you can do with non-dialogue films. I don't know if you all noticed, it's maybe really obvious, but both of them are dealing with a lot of symbolism and a lot of metaphors. And those to me are just so important in being able to convey conceptual ideas, and kind of set limitations on how much you want your viewers to interpret on their own, or what they will interpret on their own. Because if you don't have dialogue, then your viewers will be filling in the gaps on their own. And the story will be driven by character actions. And if you don't want to rely solely on the behavior of your characters, I think that symbolism and metaphors are the best way to accomplish that. So in the first film in Wang the hijab, wearing a hijab was sort of an indicator of her heritage. And then I had a symbol, it was a floral symbol in a diamond shape. And that was inspired by wall art that we had hanging in our childhood home. And I wanted to use that as a symbol for my childhood. Whether or not people interpreted it that way is sort of up to them. But that's the beauty with symbolism like that, is you can kind of give them the liberty to apply their own meaning to it. I hope that is helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. What about like maybe like a narrator or something? Wouldn't that like solve the problem of just because I consider maybe because it's makes a bit more easy to like convey the story or something, and because we also have to make a film of a novel, how Mirdayanti already told. What do you think, or yeah, about like a narrator or like an off? How is it like? like a voice from off screen or something? Like, yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, what I think about it is that I love shorts like that a lot. And I think it's another one of those things where it's a very intentional choice. So if you choose to have a narrator, think about why you want to have a narrator. I think traditionally the association that, for example, I have with a narrator is that it's maybe a storybook type of feeling. Maybe we're retelling like an old tale that we've all heard a lot. The voice of the narrator will contribute to that a lot too. You know, if you have an elderly voice, maybe it feels like you're hearing like an ancient story versus like if you hear a really, really young voice, it's a story that's innocent and very intuitive. So I think all of those things considered, maybe people can disagree with me on this. I don't really think it's a big deal, but I think that I would consider narrative film still film with dialogue on some level. But it's interesting because you're separating the dialogue from the behavior of the characters themselves. And I think one of the things that you want to be intentional with if you're working with a narrator is how much you want to separate the viewer from the protagonists, because you kind of build that connection with the narrator first before you build the connection with the characters. So in that case, I think camera angles and posing can help a lot with that. If you have a lot of really intimate camera angles, a lot of intimate or like really dynamic posing, you can bring the viewer closer to the characters so they don't feel like they have that barrier of a narrator. But also you can work really well with the barrier of the narrator. Sometimes the narrator can be the person who is sort of poking fun at the character, or we are telling us to feel a certain way about the character. So I think there's a world of opportunities there. And I think another one of those things I don't really do very well because I'm not very great at writing out script. But if you choose to do that, I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, thank you very much. That helped a lot.
No problem.
I think it's a good idea. And also, what you say, you can play a lot with these different techniques, I guess. It's also what you presented is a storyboard which is very visual, with all kinds of panels that you draw. But you also said that text can be part, written text or verbal text, right? Can be part of the storyboard. So, like you said, the example that you gave is that you photographed your dolls in all kinds of different angles, and that you pasted them on boards or something like that. So you don't need to be a good drawer or things like that, but you can experiment a little bit with these different genres of text or different, whether it's visual in the sense of drawings or photographs or other things. I mean, that is a question. A question that I had with this, you are very, very visual. Do you sometimes use the camera if to see if a certain camera angle works or not, or are you so visual that you know, okay, this works or not?
I do not think about camera angles instinctually. I actually struggle with them a lot. The work that I look at, it's kind of work with the nature of Wes Anderson films where it's flat, but he's very, very good at making it flat. So instinctually when I work, I'm always thinking about work like that. So I make really flat compositions, but they're not intentional. It's just that I don't really explore camera angles organically very much. And so the way that I make storyboards, my first round is really flat. I don't think about camera angles at all. The first round is purely, I want to illustrate what is happening and where everyone's standing and where everyone's going to go. And then 2 or 3 rounds after, I look at every single shot and I'm like, what's a different angle that will work for this? What am I trying to tell the viewer?
Okay.
because I think camera angles, I mean, you're right, it is something that you have to really play with. You're not going to get it right the first try every time, I don't think.
Okay. So in the composition, you don't use camera angles?
The first time, no, I don't. Yeah, it's definitely a secondary thought, but
okay.
really important.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
So Shanti, how is the music actually? What role plays the music for the storyboard, or how do you like connect the storyboard with the music that you choose for the film?
So typically, when I work, I have a pretty good sense of the genre of music that I want to work with, because I can't think without having film soundtracks on. And those are usually what tell me about the tone of my story. But two things that I will say. The first thing is that you are figuring out timing choices in the storyboard. You don't necessarily need to think about sound at this stage. I think that is a personal preference. But if there is an important point in the story where you're like, this is where I want there to be this grand soundtrack, or I want this to be a lot more, I want to pull back this scene a lot more, I don't want audio here at all. Those are things that should go in the notes section of your storyboard. I think those are really important to think about. It's really important, though, to not get locked in by ideas of music too early on, unless that is like the concept of your work. Because what they teach us at school all the time is that your film work is 80% sound and 20% visuals. And I think that's true. I think like soundtrack makes or breaks a film, and that's why it's something that I invest a lot of time in. But usually I have a finished storyboard, and that's when I hand it off to my music producer. In fact, I don't even have a finished storyboard. I usually have an animatic. And an animatic is the next stage of a storyboard. That's when you take each of the panels and you line them up in a video in time, so you know exactly what timing you're working with. And usually when that video is finished, that's when I hand it off to the musician to actually start composing.
Okay, so does the music actually go very closely with the character's movement, or with what is it? So it's the closest things that come to the music decision, for example.
Again, I think that depends on the director. I didn't want sound effects in my film. I think that is a big motivator behind whether or not you want those cues in your music. But I did ask the composer to do some of that for Sprouting Out of Step, not for Wayang Fong, but for the second film. I told him not specifically to assign sounds to the characters, but rather certain emotions or instruments when certain characters were behaving a certain way. If I'm being totally honest, off the top of my head, I can't really remember what those are anymore. But I think those are sort of things that usually the musician is pretty good at figuring out. Like, for example, if you're having a musically guided piece and you have, let's say, you have a character that is really big and a character that's really small, you could use a dainty instrument anytime that small character appears, like maybe like a wind chime or something. And when that really big character appears, you could have like, I don't know, a trumpet. That's something that like Disney does a lot for like elephant characters and Winnie the Pooh. So those are ways that music can help without sound effects. But there is a part, there should be a section in your storyboards to talk about sound effects. I think that those guide action as well. So definitely consider that.
So if our student don't put any music for their short film, would it be boring or not?
It needs to be on purpose and it needs to be pushed. So if you're not putting music, really, really think about why. It can be a way to make something feel a lot more eerie. I've seen experimental horror film do that before. Also films that adapt the old-timey look, so the silent film look, where everything's black and white, old film filter, all of that. It has to be a conscious choice, I think. Otherwise, it will be confusing to the viewer. So I think if you do a couple test runs with the viewers and they still have a lot of questions, don't be afraid to go back and push it even more.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Shanti. Please, anyone, if has a question for Shanti, I see Mbak Eka Nusa Pertiwi also here. She had a presentation last week on this class too. And also, I don't know the name. If not, I have also one question. I just wondering, because you bring a very abstract and very ideological theme, I think, in all of your movie. And how can you, or how did you choose a certain symbols to be used in this movie so your idea can be carried out perfectly? Or yeah, it's very, I think it is not an easy way to make it. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I usually think about visuals first. I'm a very design-driven person. So the first thing I think about is the texture and color that I want to use. But that's just me. I think when trying to decide what sort of symbolism will work for your story, I think about start first by thinking about traditional connotations to certain imagery. So for example, for sprouting out of step, the reason that I chose to do flowers is just the idea of spring, the idea of things being in bloom. What else? The idea of the beauty of youth to an extent. And then I was also just thinking about, initially, the symbolism wasn't actually that everyone had flowers. Initially, the protagonist was meant to be growing weeds out of her head. And that was, to me, the symbol that I started with, is that, oh, she's different from everyone else. Like, she can't grow something that's of value. It's kind of goes with the saying that, I can't remember exactly how the saying goes, but it's something like, allow weeds to grow, give them the space. I don't really remember. But I had to change that because a teacher chopping off a weed off a student's head is actually helping them. So you do have to think about, the logic behind it a little bit. But yeah, I would say start with traditional connotations to imagery, and then think about visually how that translates. I didn't want anything aggressive. I wanted it to feel delicate, but then at the same time, for the teacher, I wanted it to feel really aggressive. So that's why I chose a Venus flytrap. The imagery of things being snapped off, these fangs, these being scary. Initially the idea of flower imagery was meant to be dainty, but I was like, for this teacher, it's not. And even for the, where is it? Even for the student in the bottom right corner, the one who's meant to be more powerful, I wanted to give her a plant that was more angled, more spiky, tones of red, really dark leaves. All of those things, I think, will make up how that symbol communicates to your audience.
Do you use quite a limited palette of colors, which restricts your choices, of course? I mean, it's if I may comment, it's rather gloomy, this background, and a bit eerie on all these flowers growing, and this color. I mean, it's really brownish. A bit subdued, and I like it, but it gives a certain atmosphere, which is a bit, I don't know. It's like what you said earlier with the black and white movies. It gives a bit of sepia type of character of these scenes, a bit Kafka like. And I
you mean what films, or the first one or the second one, Payan?
no, this second one, what's on the screen here, especially also with the teacher with no eyes, only the glasses. So yeah, it's a little bit Kafka, or also we in Holland we have a writer who writes a bit like that, from the same period of time, the early 20th century, I guess.
Oh, that's right. Also, the two students on the right side in the back, also they don't have eyes and the other. So that's that I just want to also ask that.
Yeah. So all of those things, these are actually things that I figured out in the color scripting stage. Color scripting is sort of it's not necessarily a concrete step. It can happen before or after the animatic. I did it after the animatic. But it's when you storyboard out the color palettes throughout your entire piece. And what's really helpful about that is that you can transition from one color story to another color story and really coordinate your whole film without your audience even picking up on it by putting it all on one page in one sheet. And so what I did for this film, even though I did stick to one color palette, I wanted to see how my images would look visually if I put like basically every camera shot next to each other with color in it. And that kind of led to the decisions that I made with color. I also was working off the idea of plants, so I wanted it to feel really organic. And then I also only wanted to emphasize characters of importance, so I assigned like a beige color and like removed faces for like the characters in the background. I think color scripting I don't really know a lot of people who enjoy doing it, and it's typically a job of its own. But I think it's really transformative in terms of not only figuring out the color palettes you want to use with just to make things look designed and considered, but also to really think about how lighting and shadow will affect the atmosphere of your piece.
About these faceless characters in the background, is that negative or positive space?
Within their faces, I guess it would be negative space. In that image in the bottom corner, I would say the floor is actually the negative space, because it's sort of the canvas on which the illustrations are coming out of. Negative space it's typically the background. It's typically like a solid color or a gradient or a texture.
Yeah. In the other panels, it's much easier, of course.
Yeah.
So if the student apply this to the real characters, not like animation, how does it work? Like the face without eyes, something like that. So that the student maybe get the idea how can they also do the similar things with the real character.
So I think, again, that's a lot of different ways that you can do that. I can mention some ideas off the top of my head, although I do find that a lot of principles with storyboarding are the same, because you're not really bringing it into real life just yet. If you're moving into, let's say, this scene at the bottom corner, we were filming that like in real life. I would say a couple things that really help is the costuming of the characters. If they have very obvious main character qualities, one of the things that I did here with mine is that both of these main characters had an alternative version of the uniform, and everyone else had a very standard one in the background. So that was one thing I thought about. I think the other thing is spacing. You want to just make sure in live action, I think that there's a little bit more separation from background actors or background elements that there is with the characters in the foreground. And I think another thing is also just camera focus, and then also the amount of movement that you have in the background. You really want to limit any distracting movement that you have in the background. Distracting lights, just avoid too many reflective surfaces, or facing the right direction of the sun. And I think that it should be strategic. I think that if you choose to have a busy background versus positioning your actors against a simpler background, that there should be a reasoning behind that. So, do you want them to know about the environment the character is in? Is that influencing the character's behavior? Or are we really just focused right now on what the character is saying and what their body language is? I think those are good things to think about.
Thank you. I think for the student, that's a good information, because if they take one chapter from a novel, for example, they have to know what is the environment how does it look like, in their own interpretation. So, thank you.
It's very much like how do you retell the story? and also Ramaida's work, I think, help with this, with making or retelling this. So what is the point of view, and who's the narrator, what is the focus, etc. Right? I mean, this is if you this is a visual without text or verbal text, but in verbal text you also have these techniques that come to the fore. I think, Ramaida.
Yeah, but Aida, how is it? Because your novels, there are a lot of dialogues, you know. It's like your novels are very busy, if I see like a lot of things going on. So how would you like, let's say, the student who makes film from one chapter of your novel, how would you like to have it?
Yes, of course, they can change it freely because my novel is a third-person point of view. So it's the narrator, I don't have narrator in my novel. So really, it is like a free adaptation. So even they can change the point of view or even the character. And I think it is like a different work to adapt from novel to a script, for example. So it's really, they can change it and then what we call it, make an adaptation that it is possible to be filmed in here because my novel has a background in Java, so it's a really different background with Germany. So I think they have to change it so it can be possible to be filmed here in Germany. So it's free to them to change it Bayan, because it's impossible, I think, to adapt it really as much as my novel tells about the character and the story. So yeah. And I
Maybe
think
students have question. How long do we have time still?
I think we still have 20 minutes, Mirdayanti. I think
so maybe I don't know.
I'm sure many students
Maggie,
have many
Jamie,
questions.
Leon.
Hello.
Mang Oleh, I
Hello.
heard that you have a question.
Yeah, I would something. I mean, it's more like practically like person like me. I mean, like if I'm not mistaken, either way, we need to able to draw, whether with hand or with apps. But like for person like me, I mean, like my hand drawing also very crap, and I also have no any experience for storyboard apps. Maybe you can give any advice for that things for dummies.
Okay. I will say I'm very bad at thumbnailing actually naturally. And I don't sketch the way that my film turns out. So I do have a couple ideas for you if drawing is not your thing, which I think is totally cool. I think that when you're storyboarding, it's really good to start with just shapes, and even a stick figure with just give him like a little bit of skin. Like it doesn't need to be proportionate or anything. Labeling can always help if you feel like your drawings aren't clear enough. But let's say, for example, that you want to have a scene where two characters are sitting across from each other at a table and the camera is over the shoulder of someone on like the left side, for example. I think all you really need there is like a bag shape of the character in the front, and then just block that in with shadow. And then you can just draw a circle for like the table in the middle, a flat circle, and then just another like blob shape for the person right behind. And if you feel like you don't want to take your drawing any further than that because you're like, oh, this is not my thing, I think you can write that out in the notes and put in some more details or label it. I think that if you just want to work with shapes, that's fine too. You can just use arrows to express everything. But if you really don't want to sketch, there are a lot of examples of people online who work purely in text. I know that I have a friend who makes Excel spreadsheets, and she has columns for different levels of information. So she'll have the timestamp, and then she'll have who's in the scene, what is in the background or what is in the setting, where the camera is, and then what the action is. And then she'll have like an extra column for notes. And that's how she storyboards, and it works for her. and she's an abstract artist too, so there's really not much sketching she can do because she doesn't know visually how her things are going to turn out, because it's dependent on materials. So maybe that would be helpful. Another thing you can do if you really want to use images is you can collage images from the internet. If I'm working on a project that's not very serious, I'll usually just Google every single image, crop it out, and paste them together, and I'll have like a designated image for like each character pretty much. And then also if you still find that you're struggling, you can use color, not so much color of your film, but color as indicators or color as cues. That can be really helpful. And finally, if all of those things don't work for you, you can also gather your actors, go to a mock-up of your set or go to the actual set and just take pictures roughly of what you want to happen and then go back to the board and like rearrange those things. Because I do know some directors too who like to actually go out and shoot it, but everyone's in their casual clothes. They'll just be at the house, you know, and just getting the general idea. And then again, you can write your details out in words if that's helpful.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
Is that what you do in the film Off-White? Like 2016?
Yeah, I didn't storyboard that one actually.
Can you show?
We can.
Yeah, maybe you can show the audience about that, because you have like, you put a lot of shapes and color.
Right.
Not much color, but shape. Yeah. Off-White, is it right?
Yeah, I'll put in the link in Vimeo. For that one, if I don't want a storyboard, because that was a more experimental piece, I like to just make a mood board of the images that I want to express, pretty much.
Because I don't understand the story.
Yeah,
in this film Off-White. Maybe you can say it. Do you want everybody to look at it?
Yeah, you guys can watch it. It has sound. If you want to mute before you click it, but yeah.
Thank you. Mang Oleh, is that more or less also related to your question?
Yeah, it's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for that one, I didn't storyboard anything. I actually, I just, I took a mood board of images, I printed all of those out, and I just rearranged them because it was honestly just an exploration of texture. And technically I did the storyboarding after, because then I had all of these clips and all of these images, and most of the process was just rearranging the final shots. So you can kind of work backwards, especially if you're more of an abstract thinker, or if material is the primary source of your narrative.
Okay.
So in fact, we can make a film without storyboard and Shanti.
Yeah, you don't have to. I think that if you have a film that is really narrative or representational, I think it's pretty hard to work without one, at least some form of visuals to your script. But this is sort of, if it doesn't need a script, I don't think it necessarily needs a storyboard, but if it needs a script, it might need a storyboard, is the way I see it.
So the script is the key, yeah? Whether we need storyboard or not. Okay.
I think a script is important. Even if you're working experimentally, I mean, I think a script can even be just a paragraph of how you want it to look and feel, or what you're gonna do. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I'm gonna go to the woods and I'm gonna do macro shots of the textures and leaves. And I wanna put it over music that's ambient and slow, and I wanna add sound effects of water over it. I think that can be a script. But I think that it depends on like your editing style too. Like if you think that you want to have the finished cut, the finished visuals first, and then you want to put it together, then I think that is sort of your storyboarding process. It's the last stage.
Yep. Thank you.
There is one title in German, Luft. So what happens if the audience don't understand what Luft is? How do you convey the message from that for your film?
But no, the reason that I chose to do that in German was because that was inspired by annual flights to Germany. So that was the reason why. Also, I felt that the word in English was a little bit basic. But I think there's also an added element of putting in something there that you know your audience won't understand right away. Because it forces them to think about it and sit with it a little bit longer. And even if they research it, it forces them to consider the decisions you made a little bit more. And I think that makes everything more intentional.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? We still have, couples of minutes.
Can I ask the class of what have they learned, and how is the film progressing now?
So the
students have to answer.
Jamie should answer.
Yeah, because I think all the important questions were already asked. I wanted to start with what I've learned. So when I think about making our film, I actually take out of this session that we should kind of keep it simple from the beginning on. So because we actually got no experience like you, Shanti, we really have to step some steps down and start with a very basic approach, I think. So when I thought about the project before we had any sessions, I was like, oh my God, we have to do this and put in that and the dialogue and the camera. And now I'm more like, okay, I know what's behind the work behind for a person that has a lot of experience. We have to, I don't know, maybe like Amaida already said, have to kind of develop the chapter we're gonna take, and maybe focus like what you said on expressing through emotions or shots instead of just giving the information via dialogue. So yeah, but I'm quite overwhelmed with all the camera perspectives, with the color work, with everything. And I'm quite scared if we have like actors, if we can easily explain what we want them to show with their expressions, because you can just illustrate if they look like shocked or I don't know. So that's a big question I have in mind, but I mean, when it's already there, we can approach it when we're doing the work by filming or storyboarding. Yeah.
You can do a lot of experiments. Experimental film is also very interesting, Jamie.
Yeah, but one idea behind the class, I think, is just this, that we realize what kind of work goes into making a film and how these processes go. I mean, it's not by producing a wonderful film that will be sent to Sundance or wherever you can send these films to. it's much more of doing, learning while doing. So what goes into a film, and how because we very passively watch movies, watch animation, and say, "Oh, nice," or "not so nice," or whatever. Um, but we have no idea what the procedures and processes are, what that are behind these pieces of art. So I think that is the most important thing of this whole class, I would say. Plus, yeah, also some Indonesian and some knowledge about Indonesia, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's good if the student take part in all the lecture series, because what I have learned also from different speakers, different presentation is like, how is it? So it's you get a lot of ideas, but at the end you are the one who decides. So it's like you take from here that one, maybe, oh yeah, that's one, maybe a lot of things that maybe you didn't expect before. Oh, okay, I can do that. Oh, I'm allowed to do that, something like that. So.
Yeah, I think we are at the end of the class, Mbak Yanti.
Ini Alif, ada pertanyaan, Mbak Ida.
Okay.
Di chat.
Yeah. I think
maybe
Shanti,
you can read it. Oh.
Okay. It is just comment. I agree with what Jamie said, and I'm happy to hear that we can go like always to experiment what we can do. So, yeah.
I also just want to say that I think, I just wanted to say, Jamie, I think your instinct is right, to scale it down and keep it simple at the beginning and build on that from there. And I totally resonate with you in that hearing about camera angles for the first time is pretty overwhelming, and it's a lot of terminology. But if there's any advice that I can give is to not think about it in terms of terminology, but when you're holding the camera, just think, the way I'm holding it, how does this feel to me now? Like, what is this telling me about the character? And trust your instinct. I think trusting the first feeling you have when you're making these decisions, just really trusting yourself is the right way to go.
So Shanti, if everyone have questions later after this session, what is the best to contact you? Like email or WhatsApp or what?
My contact info over here, email or Instagram is usually the best way to reach me. I don't really check Vimeo very much, but please feel free to reach out if you need any advice or if you want me to check any of your work out. I'm more than happy to do that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Do I have my mic on?
Yes.
Oh, that's Shanti's grandma from Northampton, Massachusetts.
Wow.
Welcome.
Thank you. Oh, that is beautiful. Look at Shanti. I'm so proud of you. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Noel. Nice to see you. Yeah, Noel used to babysit Shanti a lot, and Wulan as well. And we used to babysit the dog in the house.
Thank you. Shanti, can the student have this your PowerPoint? Maybe it will be very useful for us. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So
yeah.
Good. And I will send them also my short PowerPoint about you at the first time, and maybe the Vimeo account, so they can check on your movies anytime. And yeah, is there any question left here? I don't think so.
I think Alan, I don't know. Okay. Alan, you have filmed, you are like working on a film of editing or something. You have a question? Is Alan there? Or but Sarah, who is always doing the YouTube film.
So there's some filmmakers here. I think that's amazing.
Yes,
we have YouTuber. Sarah is a YouTuber. And Alan and Professor Yan, they are doing film, documentary film, and I don't know who
But
else.
we didn't have a storyboard.
Well, you can ask Shanti now, maybe for.
Yeah, a bit too late, maybe.
I mean, I've made about 20 films and I've only storyboarded for 2 of them, so I'm familiar with that feeling.
I think we have also an audience from Indonesia, Mbak Eka TV. If you want to say a word or question, Mbak Eka gave us presentation last week, Mbak Yanti.
Yeah. Is he there still?
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, a picture is there.
Yes. Yeah, if not, maybe we are at the end of our class today.
Or maybe Jamie. Jamie, do you still have question? Jamie? No, okay.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah, I think, thank you so much, Shanti, for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us. It is very valuable for us and for audience. Thank you so much for participating in this class, and we will look forward to see you on next week. We will have, who is it? Kunchoro Indra Kurniawan. He is movie editor from Surabaya, Indonesia. So next week on 19 October, we will have class at the same hour about editing movie. So yeah, and thank you again for Shanti, and I hope we still keep contact with you. So we maybe anytime we can ask you about making storyboard or making a short movie in general. So we are not lost. And yeah, thank you so much, and we will see each other next week. Good afternoon, good evening.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Shanti.
Thank you, Shanti. Very good.
Noel, thank
good
you
luck.
too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.